The massive circular chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of alien representatives from across the galaxy sat in their designated areas, their voices mixing into a steady hum of different languages and tones. Today was special. They had discovered a new spacefaring species. Order in the chamber. The head counselor, a tall blue-skinned being named Lord Val, struck his ceremonial staff against the floor. The room gradually fell silent. We are here to discuss the recent discovery of a new species in the Orion arm of our galaxy. They call themselves humans. The main display screen lit up, showing images of Earth and its colonies. Intelligence Officer Tom Miller stood in the shadows of the human delegation's small booth, watching carefully as the alien representatives leaned forward in their seats. His years of training told him something wasn't right. The looks on their faces weren't of curiosity, but of barely hidden amusement. Admiral Ross, the leader of the human delegation, stood proudly at the speaking platform. His clean-cut uniform and confident stance represented the best of human space fleet tradition. Honorable members of the Council, he began, humanity comes in peace. We seek to join your galactic community and share in the peaceful exchange-off. A burst of laughter interrupted him. It came from the Steelborn Empire's section, a race of metallic-skinned beings known for their massive warships and warrior culture. Is something amusing, Ambassador? Admiral Ross asked calmly, though Miller could see his jaw tightening. The Steelborn Ambassador, his chrome-like skin reflecting the chamber's lights, stood up. My apologies, Admiral, he said, not sounding sorry at all. But surely you jest. We have seen your fleet. He waved his hand, and new images appeared on the main screen. Human ships floating in space. More laughter spread through the chamber. Even Lord Val had to hide a smile behind his hand. Miller understood why. Next to the massive ships of other species, human vessels looked tiny. The largest human battleship was barely the size of a Steelborn light cruiser. Their space stations, which humans considered impressive, were dwarfed by the floating cities other races had built. Our ships are built to be efficient, Admiral Ross explained, his voice steady. Size isn't everything, Ambassador. Efficient. The Steelborn Ambassador's laugh boomed through the chamber. They're adorable. Like toys. Tell me, do you use them to train your children? Red-faced but maintaining his composure, Admiral Ross tried to continue his presentation. He spoke about Earth's history, their technological achievements, their hopes for the future. But Miller could see most representatives had stopped listening. They were passing notes, whispering jokes, some even openly mocking the size of human ships on their personal devices. If I may, the Steelborn Ambassador interrupted again. I have a suggestion. Perhaps the humans would be better suited to managing local transport services. Small passenger shuttles between our proper ships. It seems more appropriate for their capabilities. The chamber erupted in laughter again. Lord Val didn't even try to restore order this time. In his corner, Miller watched Admiral Ross's hands grip the podium tightly. The intelligence officer had studied enough alien history to know what usually happened next. Younger races, when mocked like this, typically either exploded in anger or retreated in shame. But humans weren't typical. Admiral Ross simply smiled. Thank you for your suggestion, Ambassador. We will take it under consideration. His voice carried no anger, no embarrassment, just calm confidence that made Miller proud to be human. As they left the chamber later that day, Miller caught up with the Admiral. Sir, they're underestimating us. Badly. Ross nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Yes, they are. And Officer Miller. Sir, let's let them keep doing that. For now. Miller understood. He had seen the classified reports, knew what human ships could really do. Their size wasn't a weakness. It was their greatest strength. But the Council wouldn't learn that today. They would learn it the hard way, when they finally pushed too far. As their shuttle departed from the Council station, Miller looked back at the massive alien ships surrounding them. They were huge, impressive, and terribly, terribly vulnerable. But that was a lesson for another day. 3 months after the disastrous first contact, Intelligence Officer Tom Miller stood in Admiral Ross's office aboard the human space station, Hope Point. The station might have been small by alien standards, but its windows offered a perfect view of Earth's defense fleet. "They're pushing again, sir," Miller said, placing a data pad on the Admiral's desk. "The Steelborn Empire has moved 3 mining operations into the Ross 154 system. Our system." Admiral Ross picked up the pad, his face growing darker as he read. "Right on the edge of our space. Just close enough to be a threat, just far enough to claim it's a misunderstanding." He looked up at Miller. "What's your assessment?" "They're testing us, sir." After that council meeting, Miller paused, choosing his words carefully. "They think we're weak, easy prey." A series of alerts flashed across the office's main screen. More Steelborn ships had appeared at the edge of human space. Not warships, not yet, but their massive cargo vessels and mining ships dwarfed anything in the human fleet. Each one was like a floating city, bristling with what they claimed were mining lasers. "Look at the size of those things," Miller muttered. "Each one is bigger than our largest orbital dock." "Size," Ross said with a slight smile, "isn't everything. Remember that, Tom." The door chimed, and Captain Rogers entered with another report. His face was red with anger. "Sir, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. The Steelborn ambassador just sent an official message. They're claiming mining rights to any system where they don't see, and I quote, significant local development. In other words, Miller translated, any system without giant ships or stations like theirs." "Exactly." Rogers slammed his fist on the desk. "We've got colonies in 3 of those systems. Small ones, sure, but they're our people." Admiral Ross stood and walked to the window. Below, a human destroyer was preparing for patrol. It was sleek, efficient, and absolutely tiny compared to the Steelborn ships now visible at the edge of the system. To alien eyes, it probably looked like a lifeboat next to their ocean liners. "Send a message to all colonies," Ross ordered. "Tell them to continue normal operations, but be ready for emergency protocols, and get me a secure line to Earth Command." "You think it'll come to war?" Miller asked quietly. "They think it'll come to surrender," Ross corrected him. "The Steelborn believe we'll just give up. After all, how could our tiny ships possibly stand against their mighty fleet?" A junior officer rushed in without buzzing. "Sir, the Steelborn just landed troops on New Hope. They're calling it a mining safety inspection, but they're armed." Ross didn't even flinch. Instead, he pressed a button on his desk, and a hidden panel slid open in the wall. Inside was a detailed holographic display, showing hundreds of small dots moving in formation. "Tell me, Tom," Ross said, "did you ever wonder why we build our ships so small?" Miller looked at the display, and suddenly he understood. Those dots weren't stars or debris. They were ships. Hundreds of ships, hidden in plain sight, too small for standard alien sensors to even register as military vessels. "How many?" he whispered. "Enough," Ross said simply. "Send final warning to the Steelborn. Tell them they have 1 hour to withdraw from all human systems." "And if they don't?" Rogers asked. "Then we show them why humanity chose to build small." Ross's voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. "We show them why we focused on efficiency instead of size. We show them what real space warfare looks like." As Miller hurried to send the message, he glanced one last time at the massive Steelborn ships looming in the distance. They were impressive, yes. Intimidating, certainly. But as he looked closer, he could see so many weak points, so many blind spots, all perfectly sized for a small, fast ship to exploit. The storm was coming. And the Steelborn were about to learn that sometimes the smallest predators are the most dangerous. The Steelborn battle group entered the Ross 154 system like giants walking into a pond. Their massive ships, each 1 kilometer long, pushed forward with total confidence. At their head was the flagship Mountain Crusher, its silver hull gleaming in the starlight. Captain Jane Walker stood on the bridge of the human destroyer Swift Justice, watching the enemy approach. Her ship was barely visible against the backdrop of space, its dark hull and small size making it look like nothing more than a speck compared to the oncoming fleet. "They're broadcasting on open channels, Captain," her communications officer reported. "They want everyone to hear this." "Play it," Walker ordered, her face calm. The steel-born commander's voice boomed through the bridge. "Attention, insignificant human vessel. You are ordered to leave this system immediately. These resources are now under steel-born protection. We would hate to accidentally crush your little ship while we work." Laughter echoed in the background of the transmission. Walker just smiled. "Send response. Open channel," she said. "Steel-born vessels, this is Captain Walker of the Earth Fleet Destroyer Swift Justice. You are in violation of human space. Leave immediately or face the consequences." There was a pause, then more laughter. "Did you hear that?" the steel-born commander said to his crew, not bothering to cut the transmission. "The tiny ship is threatening us. How cute. Tell me, little human, do you know how many of your toy ships we could fit in our cargo hold?" Walker looked at her tactical display. The steel-born ships were arranged in a standard formation, designed to bring maximum firepower to bear on large targets. "Perfect. Time to show them why size matters less than they think," she said quietly. "All hands, battle stations. Activate gravity drive." The Swift Justice hummed to life. Deep in its core, humanity's greatest secret began to spin up. Artificial gravity controls far beyond anything the larger races had developed. "What's this?" The steel-born commander's mocking tone changed slightly. "Your power readings just spiked. Having engine trouble, little one." Walker didn't respond. Instead, she gave a simple order: "Execute pattern Delta." The Swift Justice moved. Not like a normal ship, not like anything the Steelborn had ever seen. It flipped end over end in an instant, then shot forward at speeds that should have turned its crew to paste. The massive alien ships tried to track it, but their weapons were designed to hit targets their own size, not something so small moving so fast. "Impossible," the Steelborn commander shouted. "Nothing can maneuver like that. The key forces would kill anyone without proper inertial dampeners." Walker finished for him, her voice now being broadcast to the whole Steelborn fleet. "Good thing we figured those out." The Swift Justice danced between the massive ships, moving in ways that defied normal physics. Where the Steelborn needed kilometers to turn, the human ships spun on a dime. Where their guns needed seconds to track targets, the Swift Justice was already somewhere else. "Fire on that insect," the commander ordered, panic creeping into his voice. Multiple beams of energy lanced out from the Steelborn ships. Some hit each other as the human vessel ducked and weaved between them. The Swift Justice rolled impossibly fast, its small size now a massive advantage in the crowded battlefield. "You know your problem," Walker said calmly as her ship finished another impossible maneuver. "You built your ships like floating cities. We built ours like fighter jets." To demonstrate her point, she brought her ship into a vertical climb that turned into a backwards flip, ending up right in the flagship's blind spot. The Swift Justice was so small compared to the Mountain Crusher that their close-range weapons couldn't even depress enough to target it. "This is impossible," the Steelborn commander whispered, all mockery gone from his voice. "Fall back. Emergency retreat." As the massive ships clumsily turned to flee, Walker allowed herself a small smile. They hadn't even fired a shot, and already they'd won their first victory. The Steelborn would be back, she knew, but they'd come back with something they didn't have before: respect. The Steelborn High Command chamber was in chaos. Officers shouted over each other as they watched the battle recordings from the Ross 154 system for the 20th time. On the main screen, the tiny human ship Swift Justice performed another impossible maneuver. slipping between their massive warships like a fish through coral. It must be fake. General Kraz slammed his metallic fist on the table. No ship can move like that. In the corner of the room, their chief scientist, Dr. Vell, cleared his throat. Actually, the footage is real. And I think I know how they did it. The room fell silent as Vell walked to the main display. He froze the image of the Swift Justice mid-flip, a maneuver that should have crushed any crew with the G-forces involved. Look at their power readings, he pointed to a graph. Every time they make these impossible moves, there's a spike in energy from their core. They're not using standard engines at all. They're manipulating gravity itself. Back in human space, Intelligence Officer Tom Miller stood with Admiral Ross, watching a different kind of display. Steel-borne communications were lighting up across every channel as their military tried to make sense of what had happened. They're running simulations, Miller reported, reading the intercepted data, trying to figure out how to counter our maneuverability. He paused, smiling. They're also arguing about whether their sensors were malfunctioning. They can't believe a ship that small could carry such powerful technology. Ross nodded. Size isn't just about what you can fit inside. It's about what you don't need to carry. He pointed to a diagram of a standard steel-borne warship. Look how much space they waste. Massive crew quarters, huge recreational areas, oversized corridors. They build their ships like floating cities because they don't know any other way. On the other side of the system, Captain Walker was putting the Swift Justice through a training exercise. Her ship spun and twisted through a field of practice drones, moving in ways that would have torn any alien vessel apart. Status report, she called out to her engineering chief. Inertial dampeners holding steady at 99.9% efficiency, he reported. The new gravity drive upgrades are working perfectly. We could probably pull even tighter turns if you want to push it. Walker grinned. The Steelborn still didn't understand. They thought humanity's small ships were a sign of technological limitation. They couldn't grasp that it was a deliberate choice, the result of centuries of refinement and efficiency. Back in the Steelborn High Command, Dr. Vell was finishing his presentation. Their inertial dampening technology must be at least 3 generations ahead of ours, combined with their gravity drive. But how? General Kraz interrupted. Their ships are tiny. Where do they fit all this technology? That's just it, Vell explained. They miniaturized everything. While we were building bigger ships to fit more technology, they were making their technology smaller and more efficient. He pointed to various sections of the Swift Justice's scans. No wasted space, no redundant systems. Everything serves a purpose. It's actually brilliant. The general's face darkened. Can we copy their technology? Not quickly. This level of miniaturization would take years, maybe decades to replicate. And Vell hesitated. If this is what they're showing us with just one small destroyer, imagine what other surprises their fleet might have. As if to answer his question, new alarms started blaring. Reports were coming in from across human space. More ships like the Swift Justice had been spotted, all of them moving with the same impossible agility. The Steelborn's massive sensors, designed to track large vessels, were having trouble even detecting these tiny predators. In his office, Admiral Ross received the reports of the Steelborn's confusion with satisfaction. Send word to all ships, he ordered Miller. Operation Thunderstorm is approved. It's time to show them that humanity's fleet isn't just small. He looked out at the stars, where dozens of human ships were powering up their gravity drives. It's concentrated. The Steelborn invasion fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, like a wall of metal spreading across space. 500 capital ships, each one massive enough to hold an entire human battle group in its hull. Their formation stretched for thousands of kilometers, blocking out the stars behind them. That's a lot of ships, Intelligence Officer Miller said quietly, standing on the bridge of Earth's flagship Defender. Admiral Ross nodded calmly. They think numbers will save them. Classic military thinking. If one big ship doesn't work, use hundreds. He turned to his communications officer. Send the signal. Operation Thunderstorm begins now. Across human space, small ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields, behind moons, and in orbital shadows began to move. The steel-borne sensors barely registered them. After all, what threat could such tiny vessels pose to their mighty armada? Enemy fleet holding position at maximum weapons range, Miller reported. They're charging weapons. Of course they are. Ross smiled. They still think this is going to be a standard battle. Captain Walker, you may proceed. The Swift Justice, now joined by 30 other destroyers of similar size, shot forward in perfect formation. The steel-borne guns tracked them, ready to fire. Attention human vessels. The steel-borne admiral's voice boomed across all frequencies. Your bravery is noted, but futile. Surrender now, and we will be merciful. You cannot hope to defeat our numbers with your handful of tiny ships. Ross keyed his own communications. You still don't understand what you're looking at, do you? His voice was almost pitying. Those aren't just destroyers approaching your fleet. They're carriers. Carriers. The confusion in the steel-borne admiral's voice was clear. Impossible. They're too small to launch fighters. That's when the tiny human ships opened their hulls. Swarms of even smaller craft poured out, hundreds from each destroyer. Fighter drones, each one barely larger than a human ground car, filled space like angry bees from disturbed hives. They moved with the same impossible agility as their motherships, their small size making them almost invisible to the steel-borne's targeting systems. By the stars, the steel-borne admiral whispered, "How many?" 10,000 combat drones, Ross answered calmly. All controlled by AI pilots who don't need life support, don't need crew quarters, don't need anything except engines, weapons, and targeting systems. You wanted to know why our ships were so small. He paused. It's because we learned to think small. The drone swarms accelerated, moving faster than any manned ship could manage. Their tiny size let them slip through energy shields calibrated to stop capital ship weapons. Their weapons, miniaturized but no less deadly, targeted exact weak points in the massive steel-borne vessels. Impossible. The steel-borne admiral shouted as the first of his mighty ships began to fall. Our sensors can't even lock onto them. They're too small, too fast. That's when the second wave of human ships appeared. Not destroyers this time, but actual battleships, still tiny compared to their steel-borne counterparts. But now the aliens understood that size meant nothing. Full retreat. The steel-borne admiral ordered, but it was too late. His massive ships were too slow to turn quickly, too clumsy to escape the swarm of drones that surrounded them like a cloud of steel locusts. From his position on the Defender, Miller watched in awe as the mighty invasion fleet fell into chaos. "Sir," he said to Ross, "I believe they're finally learning." Ross nodded. Size isn't everything. Quality beats quantity. And sometimes the smallest opponent is the deadliest. He watched as another steel-borne capital ship succumbed to the drone swarm. "Send word to all ships. Press the advantage. It's time to show the galaxy why humanity chose to build small." The battle continued, but its outcome was already certain. The age of giant warships was over. The era of human innovation had begun. Captain Walker's voice crackled over the command channel as her ship, the Swift Justice, led another attack run. "Target their engine cores. The smaller the target, the more precise we can be." The battle had turned into a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Massive steel-borne ships fired blindly into space, their giant weapons useless against targets too small to track properly. Meanwhile, human vessels and their drone swarms picked apart the invasion fleet with surgical precision. "Look at their design," Intelligence Officer Miller commented, pointing to a tactical display aboard the Defender. "All their vital systems are exposed. They never thought they'd fight anything small enough to get this close." Admiral Ross nodded. "When you build a fortress, you don't worry about ants. until those ants know exactly where to bite. He watched as a squad of drones, each barely visible on the sensors, cut through a steel-borne battleship's power conduits. The giant vessel's lights flickered and died, leaving it dead in space. The steel-borne admiral's voice boomed across the emergency channels. "This is impossible. Our ships are the mightiest in the galaxy. We have enough firepower to destroy a planet. And yet you can't hit what you can't track," Ross replied calmly. "Your sensors are designed to spot capital ships, your weapons meant to devastate entire regions of space. But what good is all that power if you can't focus it on a target?" Another group of human destroyers emerged from behind a disabled steel-borne ship. They looked like insects next to the metal giant, but they moved with deadly purpose. Each one released a fresh wave of drones, which scattered and regrouped like schools of fish, finding every weakness in the massive vessel's armor. "Sir," Miller called out, "they're changing formation. Looks like they're trying to create overlapping fields of fire." The remaining steel-borne ships drew closer together, trying to protect each other's blind spots. But this only made them a bigger target. The human drones slipped through the gaps in their defense screen, while the destroyers used their superior maneuverability to attack from multiple angles. "Status report," Ross commanded. "Enemy fleet is down to 60% strength," Miller replied. "They've lost most of their flagship's command and control capabilities. Their formation is breaking up." On the Swift Justice, Captain Walker was orchestrating a particularly daring attack. Her ship danced between two steel-borne cruisers, so close that their own weapons would risk hitting each other if they fired. The drones following her ship targeted the cruiser's weapon mounts, destroying them one by one with precise shots. "This is what we trained for," she told her crew. "Every simulation, every drill. This is why we focused on precision over power." The battle continued to turn. More steel-borne ships fell dark or drifted helplessly as human forces systematically disabled their systems. The mighty invasion fleet that had arrived to conquer humanity was being dismantled by ships they had once mocked as toys. "Send the message again," Ross ordered. "Offer them a chance to surrender." But the steel-borne admiral's pride wouldn't let him give up. "Never. We will not be defeated by these insects." "Very well." Ross sighed. He had hoped to avoid complete destruction. "All ships, execute final attack pattern. Disable their engines first, weapons second. Let's make sure some of them survive to tell this story." The human fleet moved as one, their small size allowing them to coordinate in ways the lumbering steel-borne ships could never match. Drones swarmed through the gaps in the enemy formation, while destroyers struck at vital systems with surgical precision. In less than an hour, it was over. The mighty steel-borne invasion fleet hung dead in space, their massive ships now nothing more than dark monuments to the folly of underestimating an opponent. "Signal to all ships," Ross commanded. "Mission accomplished. The age of giants is over." He looked out at the field of disabled vessels, each one a testament to humanity's different approach to warfare. Sometimes the smallest blade makes the deepest cut. The Galactic Council chamber was silent. Gone were the whispers, the laughs, and the mockery. Every representative sat in stunned silence as they watched the battle recordings Intelligence Officer Miller had provided. On the main display, they saw waves of tiny human drones dismantling ships larger than cities. They watched human destroyers dance through gaps in steel-borne defenses that shouldn't have existed. They witnessed the complete defeat of what had been considered the strongest fleet in known space. Lord Val, the head counselor, cleared his throat. "Admiral Ross, the Council owes humanity an apology." His blue skin had turned a shade paler. We greatly misunderstood your technological capabilities." Ross stood at the same podium where he had been laughed at months ago. This time, no one was laughing. "The size of a vessel," he said calmly, "doesn't determine its worth. Humanity learned long ago that bigger isn't always better." The steel-borne ambassador, his chrome skin dulled with shame, stood up. "How?" he asked simply. "How did you develop such technology?" Miller stepped forward, holding up a datapad. While other races focused on building bigger ships, we looked for ways to build better ones. Our first space stations were small because we had to be efficient. That necessity drove innovation. He tapped the pad, and new images appeared, technical diagrams of human ships. We never stopped thinking that way. When others made their engines bigger, we made ours more efficient. When they added more weapons, we made ours more precise. When they built floating cities, we built surgical instruments. But the drones, another representative called out. How did you hide such a fleet? Ross smiled. We didn't hide them. They were right there in plain sight. You all just thought our ships were too small to be worth noticing. That's the funny thing about prejudice. It blinds you to reality. Captain Walker, standing with the human delegation, added her own thoughts. Your sensors were looking for capital ships. Your weapons were designed to hit massive targets. You built your entire military doctrine around the idea that bigger means better. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Representatives from dozens of worlds were already sending messages home, ordering reviews of their own military strategies. The age of giant warships was over, and everyone knew it. The Council recognizes humanity's right to all its claimed territories, Lord Val announced formally. Furthermore, we would like to propose full membership status for Earth and its colonies, with a permanent seat on the Defense Committee. Ross nodded gracefully. We accept with one condition. He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. The mockery stops, not just of humans, but of all emerging spacefaring races, size, appearance, different approaches to technology. None of these determine a species' worth. Agreed, Lord Val said quickly. Too quickly, perhaps, but the lesson had been learned. Let this be a reminder to all that innovation and efficiency often trump raw power and size. As the council session ended, Miller found himself walking with Ross and Walker back to their ship. Their small, efficient, deadly ship. Think they really learned their lesson? Miller asked. Walker laughed. They'd better have. We didn't even show them everything our ships can do. Ross stopped at a viewport, looking out at the massive alien vessels that now kept a respectful distance from the human ships. They learned something more important than just military strategy today, he said. They learned that progress doesn't always mean getting bigger. The human ships prepared to depart, their tiny size no longer drawing mockery but respect. In the years to come, other races would start building smaller, more efficient vessels. The Galactic Council would learn to judge new races by their innovations, not their size. And if anyone ever forgot the lesson, there was always the recording of the day when humanity's tiny fleet proved that the greatest strength often comes in the smallest packages. Ready to head home? Ross asked his officers. They nodded, and their small ship turned toward Earth. Behind them, the stars seemed a little brighter, the galaxy a little wiser, and the future a little more interesting. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest sources. Humanity had proved that, once and for all.